Hello and welcome to the Galactic Core Podcast. My name is Chef and I am your host as each week I discuss the latest TV episodes, films, games and whatever else takes my fancy from the worlds of Star Wars, Marvel, DC and anything else nerdy and geeky in between. If this is the first time that you found this, then please do give us a follow on our social media pages. You'll find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and also Twitch, where I do, not always successfully, but I do try and game a couple of times a week. You can find all the links in the episode description, and please make sure that you're giving the show a like, a follow, and a review on whichever platform it is that you listen or watch on. It really does mean the world to hear that you are liking and enjoying the show. Right now, we're going to get straight into the main event, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode.
You don't exactly outrank me anymore.
In my book, experience outranks everything.
Then I definitely outrank you.
Welcome back, everyone. And this week we are chatting Star Wars Ahsoka Episode 5. Now, everyone has been waiting for this episode since last week. It's been a big build-up. There's been lots of speculation around what's been going on. It was even shown in the cinemas for the first time ever as like a streaming show that's had an episode shown in the cinema, both in America, it was in the UK as well, and in other places around the globe as well. So big expectations for this episode. Dave Filoni coming back to direct this episode, the only other episode in the series he's directing apart from episode 1. So a lot of expectations, and luckily I am joined by a fantastic guest to talk all things Ahsoka and Star Wars. He heralds from the Krypton to Alderaan Podcast. They've got an amazing show themselves, and they're very much on the Star Wars side of things, despite their name suggesting they do discuss other things, which I know they do sometimes, but I know they're primarily here to discuss Star Wars. So everybody, please welcome to the show from Alderaan, from Krypton to Alderaan even, sorry, it's Joey. Welcome to the show, bud. How you doing?
Thanks so much. Oh, and also thanks for all your kind words about Krypton to Alderaan. It is just a blast to do, and it's a blast to interact in this community as we do as Krypton to Alderaan, and be asked to be on other podcasts is great. And yeah, we mostly, our tagline is we mostly talk about Star Wars, but what else is there, really, especially now in this golden age, which, boy, I'm going to be a big fan of of the discussion we're going to have here today. But yeah, going to have to chop off the first part of our podcast name, I think. Rebrand.
I say it week in, week out, regardless of what subjects I'm talking about. Everyone knows Star Wars is my favourite thing in the entire planet. So it's the one thing, if they did the whole, you can only talk about one thing for the rest of your life, what are you going to pick? For me, always going to be Star Wars. So super excited to get into this week's episode, especially. So
same.
But before we do that, Joey, tell us a little bit about your podcast. Obviously, not just the fact that you just discussed Star Wars, but what brought you and your co-host together, and what keeps you driving to keep going with your podcast.
Yeah, great question, and also something I love talking about. What brought me and my co-host, Royce, some of your listeners might know him as Royish Good Looks. He makes parody Star Wars music. Hello from the Dark Side is a big one of his, among other things. And we were college roommates, actually got assigned randomly as college roommates. I don't know, 13 years ago. Jeez.
Blimey.
And so we just developed a friendship, and some of it was all surrounding nerdy pop culture stuff, and we all liked the same stuff, and then just continued to grow with Star Wars, especially watching all the things, playing all the games, quoting all the quotes, and then a few years ago, we've been doing Krypton to Alderaan since 2019. I think September 2019. So we're coming up on our 4-year anniversary here, our Krypton to Alderaan's 4th year birthday. But anyway, like 2 years before we started, I started like nagging Royce about starting a Star Wars podcast with the classic, like, we're having these conversations anyway, which is not it, as it turns out. It's like so much more than that. But 2 years after me bugging him to do it, and now we're 4 years into it, and we just love it. And I like what we have gotten into, especially in the past maybe year or 2 years, is a more analysis of these things, less of recaps, less of maybe just like vamping or gushing about a thing, and more maybe in-depth conversations about it. And usually it's me and him. Sometimes our partners are on the show as well, and we each have we're each in a different kind of tier of Star Wars fandom. But yeah, we do these maybe more analytical or analysis critiques, while also loving the thing. That's what makes it so great and so worthwhile to keep doing. And what keeps us going is we have started to gain more traction and gain more subscribers and gain more quote unquote fans. But Star Wars also keeps pumping out these things that it just so happens that I love. And Star Wars animation is my jam. It's my favorite Star Wars. It's what is Star Wars to me. And seeing it transition this way into Ahsoka, I feel I could talk about Ahsoka well past when this season ends. So that's the kind of stuff that keeps us going.
So you say that Star Wars animation is your jam, so I'm assuming you are a big Clone Wars and Rebels fan yourself.
Absolutely, yes.
Not that I'm trying to anyone that says that they don't watch these shows or anything like that, but what is your reaction to someone who's trying to talk to you about Ahsoka, but that they haven't really ever watched Clone Wars or Rebels, so don't have that sort of that background of knowledge that the more uber nerds of us, shall we say, like ourselves, do have?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and something that keeps coming up, right? Ever since like Ahsoka's appearance in The Mandalorian, that's been the conversation, right? Like, what about the people who didn't watch animation? And I definitely try to gauge how to have the conversation, right? Like with my partner, she's never watched any of the animated stuff. So but with her, I know I can completely nerd out and like pause when the Purrgil are on screen, right? And be like, space whales, star whales, whatever. But I also enjoy, it's complicated because I can tiptoe right off the edge of getting like super nerd out on the animation stuff. But being able to navigate that with people who I know are not going to watch the animated stuff, no matter how great I tell them it is maybe I discuss things a little more calmly or nuanced, but giving the backstory. What I think it touches a good thing about Ahsoka, I think, which is that having the context of the animated shows is great. I love lore. I don't know if you can see the books behind me, but it's just like the High Republic, all kinds of Star Wars comic books and stuff. I love the lore. I'm going to consume everything there is to consume. And I can be that kind of real life Wikipedia for people. But with Ahsoka, so having that context with Ahsoka, I think definitely elevates the story. But, this is coming from my point of view of having seen it all. It doesn't feel like you have to have watched it in order to enjoy Ahsoka, which is something I think like Dave Filoni does really well. And like I said recently on Krypton to Alderaan, like Dave Filoni has been writing these characters for like 15 years. These are his characters. So I think he's doing a really good job of continuing their story without having to necessarily consume all of the content that he's made over the past 15 years,
That's fair. I mean, it is something I field a lot of questions every week from friends and co-workers and stuff about the show and asking me to give them a bit more context to it. And I do wonder how lost some people might feel watching a show like this, because essentially, I think this is essentially Rebels Season 5. This is exactly what it feels like to me. It's and to have to fill in a lot of context for other people, I'm like, it's a hard one, because I can't imagine what it's like to not know who these characters are and the background behind them, and how this story intertwines into what we've already seen before. And especially something like this episode, which has heavy callbacks to previous events and things in Star Wars. So, but at the same time, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying about, it feels like you can watch this without necessarily knowing a lot of the backstory, because you're seeing a fresh story. If you get the gist that these are people that have had history and that do have some connection to things that have gone on in the past, but it's about their story right now, 10 years after Rebels or however long it's been. So I get that. I just find it so hard when people are asking me questions. I'm like, how can you not have watched this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, how can you not have gone and seen it already?
Yeah, exactly. I do think so. There's a lot to this. And like, I had a conversation with Royce before one of our most recent Krypton to Alderaan episodes. And I really try to, I'm a super fan, but I try to kind of like, if anyone's interested, I try to meet them where they are. I do. So I guess what I'm saying is I try to stay very positive and keep my language very positive. I do think there's a little bit here of we get caught up in having these conversations over and over again. Like there's the what if you don't watch animation conversation, and there's the are we getting too much Star Wars conversation that just keep coming up. And it's getting to a little bit of how I don't really know how to say it, but it's a little bit of like there's really only 4 seasons of Rebels. And it's there if you want it to be, if you want that context, it's there. Like I said, I'm happy to be that like encyclopedia of knowledge for anyone who has questions, but it's not inaccessible knowledge. I know that there are 7 seasons of the Clone Wars, but and some of it's great and some of it's not so great and some of it's filler, but some of it you can just like binge arcs, right? But there's also
absolutely.
7 seasons of it. So that has to mean something. It's like with One Piece now, right? We're seeing the live action One Piece and people saying, well, I'm not going to watch the anime. There's over 1,000 episodes, which I understand. But to some extent, it's also there's 1,000 episodes. Like that's good. That's a good thing, right? Like there's 7 seasons of the Clone Wars, which means that's good and there's really good stuff there. So I guess my point is it's extremely accessible if anyone's interested in the extra contextual stuff. What specifically with this episode though, they did like Filoni did these flashbacks that were perfect, I think, for like for bringing people up to speed that have not watched the animated stuff. And what I've been saying since the beginning of this series is that it's to me such a seamless transition from animation to live action. In my opinion, like he is not bridging the gap, but just like leading these characters. Like if you think of, I don't know, some kind of like ombre color palette of leading the characters from animation into live action, and their mannerisms are the same. I was talking about Hugh Yang and how his movements are like exactly the same as they are in animation and all this stuff that like you wouldn't think would work. But Filoni is, I was super skeptical going into this series, especially with her portrayal in the other live action shows we've gotten. But I will never doubt Dave Filoni again.
Well, we're certainly going to get onto a bit more of that shortly. But since you mentioned, obviously, the animation being a jam, I wanted to ask you, because I'm a huge Clone Wars fan myself. I run a few Clone Wars groups on Facebook that I've had to evolve them, to be fair, into Star Wars TV universe groups since Clone Wars ended. But what's your favourite arc from Clone Wars? Hit me.
Ooh, okay. I'm not just saying this because of today's episode, but the Mortis arc is way up there for me.
Yes, come on.
I think Mortis and the Youngling, what's it called? The Youngling arc with Hugh Yang, and they go to Ilum. Oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, I think those two are top tier Clone Wars to me, because I love this. I mean, I love the lore, so the Ilum stuff really comes into play. But I love the out there mystical Star Wars stuff, like lightsaber pew pews. That stuff's all cool. The good versus evil, Jedi Sith stuff. I love this mystical stuff, the world between worlds stuff, the Mortis stuff. That's my like hashtag. That's my Star Wars. So yeah.
I'm with you on the Mortis trilogy. That has long been my favourite Clone Wars arc by a long way. I put it up there. I mean, I'm a huge 501st fan. So the Series 6, the start of Series 6, where you got the arc with Fives and the discovering the plot with the chips in the head and everything as well, comes in, I think, a close second for me, because that is also probably my most emotional death in Star Wars was Fives.
And a turning point in the
it.
series, I think. Like there's a couple of turning points in the series that make it something very special. And the first one I would say is, I think it's in the first season when Rex first meets Cut Lawquane and starts to question, like, what does it mean to be a soldier? And then the Fives thing, when we're actually starting to figure out the lore behind the inhibitor chip and stuff like that. And then, of course, with Krell, that's just, I think, a great clone arc as well. Yeah.
God, I think we need a separate show to be geeking out on Clone Wars.
I was just thinking that.
I have to invite you back and do a Clone Wars special, I think.
Absolutely.
Just so we can geek out on that one. But what overall then is it about Star Wars that draws you in? Obviously, it's something I ask almost every guest, but it's Star Wars that I'm reviewing. But it's something that intrigues me because everyone has their own little different thing. Whether it was growing up with the original trilogies, whether it was the prequels that drew them in, and then the subsequent TV shows after that, or a particular character that they've been able to lock onto and has brought them into then the wider universe. But I'm always intrigued by everyone's answer, so even if it's a common question, I don't really care because I love the answers behind it.
Sure.
But, what is it about Star Wars that you love? What's drawn you in and what keeps you going with it?
Yeah, this is a question that I also love because so many different answers. And the one of the super special things about Star Wars and a lot of these like super passionate fandoms is that like so many people are drawn to it for so many different reasons, right? So it is what makes Star Wars special to me is different than what makes Star Wars special to you and anyone else out there listening. For me, it took me a long time to understand why. As weird as that sounds, I knew that I loved it, and I definitely got hyper fixated on loving it, and I guess I still am. But I think what it comes down is found family. Like I said, the world that George Lucas created and lightsabers and all that stuff and the Force, and it's all just so amazing what he did, and that we're still getting it in 2023. But even starting off with the found family stuff, the like having a place in the world, having a place with your people, even if it's not, even if it is a found family and not necessarily a blood family, is in retrospect what I've come to realize has been the most important thing for me. And that, I guess, that's the main umbrella answer to your question. Aside from that, I just love like the sci-fi and fantasy genres in general. So again, when it's coming together in this very mystical, magical way, which I think we owe more to Clone Wars than traditional Star Wars or older Star Wars, perhaps, I guess. So it just kind of hits on multiple levels for me. And like I said, I love the action. I love the pew pews, to quote my friend Brian from the Pink Milk podcast. But the emotional storytelling and the found family aspect of it all is really what keeps drawing me in.
Nice.
And I think that's why I love Rebels. So like Rebels just honed in on that one particular pillar of Star Wars. And they made a fantastic show out of it.
It's funny how I always see Rebels and Clone Wars in such a similar way in terms of when people watch them, people weren't that thrilled about series 1 of either show. It's maybe a bit slow, takes a while to get into, but then once it gets going, both shows absolutely awesome. They both pick up more and more. I mean, we were so lucky to be able to get them to do to come back and do series 7 of Clone Wars, and because I think the Siege of Mandalore, those last 4 episodes, has to be up there as well in terms of some of the best Clone Wars arcs or episodes that we get. It was phenomenal, especially you can tell me how you feel about this. Oh, the chat between Ahsoka and Maul when they're in the sort of throne room on Mandalore, and they're talking about the fact that Maul's like, you could help me and we can take down Sidious, and she's contemplating it, and it was the whole thing about every decision you have ever made has led to this moment, and then he puts out his hand, the glass shatters behind them, but they just don't even move it a centimeter, and they're just paused in this like forever frozen moment of contemplation. And she's like, I will help you but you need to tell me one thing, why Anakin? And Ahsoka's refusal to believe that Anakin could possibly have been bad, even though in the back of her head she probably knew it, or had that gut feeling, so to speak. Everything could have changed in that moment, because I think Ahsoka and Maul together going to the Jedi could have taken down Sidious, and that could have changed everything, couldn't it? So that arc. Sorry, I'm geeking out again about Clone Wars.
Oh no, I love this. Yeah, what are we supposed to be talking about again? This. I that's so good, and that fight scene between, like, it was motion captured, like it was really, it was taken very seriously, that bit of Clone Wars. And I don't know if we're gonna get into this about this Ahsoka episode, but Kiner's music makes or breaks me, honestly. And in that final arc, and with Ahsoka and Maul, and in this episode of Ahsoka as well.
Well, let's get into it then. I literally only finished watching this episode about 2 hours ago. It's Wednesday. I've literally got in from work, ate dinner, straight on the episode, and still trying to process everything from this episode, really, in terms of the good. What do I need more questions and answers about? Obviously the reaction, I think I've had to avoid social media almost all day. Like when I'm on my breaks and lunch at work, I'm like, I can't go on Instagram or Facebook or anything. I can't see anything until I get home and watch this. But what I have seen in a non-spoiler context is people's reactions to this episode, which has been huge. Some people calling it, some of the best writing that Star Wars has ever had. Some people saying it is one of the best episodes of Star Wars ever, of anything. I want to split this episode in half in terms of how we discuss it. So what I want to discuss is Hera and Jason and the New Republic side of the episode first, their scenes, and then we'll go into Ahsoka and Anakin and their side of scenes for the second half. So just your initial thoughts about this episode to start with. Let's start there. What were your thoughts when the credits roll, the episode's done? What are you thinking?
My initial thought was maybe very similar to the one I had last week when the credits started, which is, how am I going to talk about this? How do we even talk about this now on 2 podcasts I have to do about it? Like, I got chills so many times during this episode. I loved every single second of it. Like, there wasn't a moment of this episode that I was like, could have done without that. There were some things where I was like, I wish we could have gotten more, but that's very much the very specific to me stuff I think, which we'll probably get into. But yeah, my initial reaction was very similar. Like, does this continue to be the best Star Wars like the Star Wars we've been waiting for? Yeah. I'm curious what your reaction was as the credits began to roll.
Yeah, I just didn't know what to think. A thousand thoughts going through my head at 1,000 miles an hour in terms of what I'm trying to think about it. Where's this going next for Ahsoka? Yeah, and just how much this was a Clone Wars and Rebels fans' dream in a way. It was it's like waking up from having a dream and going, this is something that for the most part I wish I'd sort of been able to write myself and come out with some of it. It was definitely some epic bits going there, but it also did. I like to try and be pragmatic and think it did raise a couple of questions that I still think need to be answered about certain events and how things have been laid out there. So I'm hoping we get the answers moving forward. I'm also dreading if we don't, because I hate things not being wrapped up.
Sure.
Or being given the answers we need. I mean, if they plan to answer them down the line, that's fine. But if they're not answered and they're just sort of left a little bit open in terms of we'll get to that in a bit, because it's part of the Anakin bit that I'm referring to in that sense. But in terms of then Hera's sort of arc in this episode, how are you feeling about it? Jason has obviously become more and more prominent as this series has gone on. Obviously, his Force abilities seem to be coming to the fore a lot more. As always, brilliant to see a bit more Chopper, even if he's not quite as sassy as we first saw him in episode 3.
Yeah.
And as we see him, but more Chopper I'm absolutely fine with. But yeah, what were your thoughts on Hera and Jason in this episode?
I have really been loving Hera. I know that specifically you've gone maybe back and forth about this a couple of times with some of your other guests, but I've really loved the casting in their way that they're playing these roles and the way that they're being directed. And I think it's all very purposeful from what we know about these directors and Filoni. And like I said, these are his, like, he created them. He's been writing them for 15 plus years. So I really enjoy Hera. I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead is doing a great job, and I think it always ends up feeling so much like she's been through stuff, right? It doesn't feel to me like this is just a new version of this character. It feels like she's carrying the weight of the stuff that she's been through while she's been off screen. And if you haven't seen Rebels, then it might not feel that way to you, and it might feel like it doesn't need an explanation, right? This is just how the character is. But I am really enjoying it, and there was an amazing like wink and nod in this episode when she's in the Ghost with Hugh Yang, and he says, "You do the right thing because you care. That's why people like you." And she almost turns to look at the camera and smiles, and that, I mean, it might be a little cheesy, but I absolutely loved that. And I'm like, yes, that's why we love Hera. Because even through all the Battle of Endor, leading the rebellion, everything that's happened between then and now, she still does the right thing because she does the right thing and she cares. With Jason, it's so cool to see, it's just so cool to see that next generation. And what I absolutely loved about this episode was that when he told his mom that something was going on, she brushed him off initially, which scared me because that's, in my opinion, a tired trope, not taking the kids seriously, right? But then she came beside him and he said, "Listen." And she said, "To the waves crashing?" And he said, "No, the lightsabers." And they're sitting there together, communicating with the Force, which again goes along the lines of something this series has been doing, I think, which is saying anyone can tap into it if you just try and have a little bit of patience. And Hera's sitting there, listening, hearing, appreciating Jason and respecting Jason and listening to Jason and all the things that we rarely see parents do with kids in pop culture. And she's a great mom. And he seems to be a great kid. I loved that whole little scene between the two of them. And I'm really stoked we're getting to see more and more of him. I was really worried that he was just going to be kind of a little tease or something like that. But I really just loved that he's getting more prominent. I also really loved the scene where she puts up her hand and he hides behind Chopper, right? He's the droids protecting him and stuff. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the casting and the way that they're portraying these roles.
I have to admit, this episode has felt more like Hera to me than any other episode so far. So maybe it was just, I always apprehensive about the conversion of animation to live action.
Sure.
Do the voices always feel right? Do they look right? All the stuff that goes with that. And it's maybe taking me a little bit of a while, obviously 5 episodes to really warm up to Hera so far. As you rightly said in my previous episodes, I've been a little bit unsure about whether this is not necessarily the actress is the right fit, but just the way it's being portrayed, whether that felt like Hera to me. And we have to remember 10 years has passed. She's had to, we never got to see the weight of her dealing with obviously Kanan passing and having to raise Jason in the knowledge that he was likely going to be force sensitive and all the stuff that goes with that as well, whilst dealing with the rebellion, having gone through the Battle of Scarif, the Battle of Endor,
right,
and going through to the New Republic. And the way she's dealt with the New Republic has been nothing but great, especially an episode or two before when she was speaking to Mon Mothma and some of the other senators, and she's just like, "Did you fight in the war?" And they're like, "No," and she's like, "Of course not." You just sat there waiting to see who came out on top, which was amazing. Yeah. So
I loved that scene. That was the first one that I pointed out to be like, this, like, the direction, the acting, everything in this scene is perfect. So yeah, I definitely, I was this way with Ahsoka, right? Especially in the other live action stuff, which is what scared me coming into this series. But apart from that, I've been pretty on board with everybody. And yeah, like you said, a lot of time has passed. These characters have grown. Sabine has gone through a lot. You know, she's not the same Sabine we left. There was, you know, the Night of 1,000 Tears on Mandalore, and for some reason she couldn't be there. And there is this history with Ahsoka. There's so much that happened. So it's and another thing that Dave Filoni, I think, does really well in animation is these, like, the characters grow, right? We're coming from, like, The Simpsons, the longest running animated show, or maybe show, you know, whatever. And the characters never age. And the lessons they learned last time are not, you know, don't play anything into what happens next episode. These characters grow. Ahsoka literally, like, grew up in front of our eyes as an animated character. The same with the Rebels cast and crew. So to be continuing their story, and, you know, it might have not always been happy while they were off screen. Then things went a certain kind of way that led them down the path that they're on now. I think, again, is just kind of amazing, and very Filoni, right?
Yeah. Now, as for Jason, I was not expecting to see as much of him in the series as we have done. I was expecting maybe a little cameo or a mention of his name here and there. So to get as much of him as we have been, I think, has actually been an added bonus to this show, especially when we're now throwing into the fact that he's tapping into, obviously, the strong force ability that he seems to have, in terms of at the end of the last episode when he's like, you know, I've got a bad feeling, apart from it being obviously the Star Wars catchphrase. To me, it was him, like, tapping into that gut feeling that the Jedi with, should we say, a stronger midichlorian count in them tend to get. And obviously here we see obviously a lot more of it in terms of he can sense what's happening out there. And what was interesting about this, actually, and it was something I was going to pick your brain out, and you've already mentioned it, is when he's stood there saying, you know, listen to the waves, and he can hear the lightsabers crashing and the lightsabers fighting, and he tells Hera to stop and listen. I was intrigued that maybe she could hear that as well, because I thought, is this him being able to feel or see through the Force, using his stronger Force ability to hear that lightsaber battle going on? So I was maybe surprised that Hera also picked up on it. So you mentioned that, you know, it's maybe the running show, this theme, that anyone can silence their mind enough to be able to tap into it to a certain level. But given that this was a lightsaber battle going on, as far as we know, in the World Between Worlds, were you surprised that Hera was able to then hear these lightsabers crashing, and it wasn't just a Jason tapping into the Force kind of ability that he could hear it through?
Man, that's a good question. Something that I did not even consider, right? I was just completely on board from the start. Like, she's there, this mystical battle is happening on this other, like, plane of existence, and her son, who's Force sensitive, can sense it, and maybe she can too. And again, I think it's because I'm wrapped up in this theme of the show being, we've deemed it on my podcast as, what does it mean to be a Jedi, right? And that, like, the idea that everyone has access to the Force. So I think I'm mostly wrapped up in that, which is why I maybe had this suspension of disbelief with Hera being able to do it as well. So I honestly didn't question it at all. I just felt amazing. Like, it just, like, again, that was like a hair on my arms stand up moment where they're taking their time. They're, like, the show, the camera is literally on her, closing her eyes. They're making these conscious decisions to pause the show to give us a minute to, like, see what the characters are hearing, feeling, going through, which I really, really love. So yeah, it's interesting that I didn't question it, but I didn't question it at all.
I think to begin with, it was just a really cool moment in its own right. to have this melodic crashing of the waves, and then the lightsabers making the crashing sound instead of it going against the rocks, and then it becomes more prominent, and then the crashing of the waves turns more into lightsaber clashes rather than water crashing against rock.
Yeah.
And this poetic move from quiet ocean to frantic battle or frantic crashing of lightsabers was it was poetic writing in its own way. But I am a critical thinker. I do think critically. That's why I was like, could Hera really hear that? Or is it like, I wouldn't have necessarily pegged that she would have been able to. But interesting nonetheless that Jason is so young yet being able to reach out. Because I think it was whilst Kanan developed himself into a wise and really good Jedi, again, he was, in terms of, I think, Force ability, from what I know of his character, considered to be a fairly average Jedi.
Yeah.
Or not particularly strong compared to a lot of the others that we've seen. So it's interesting that maybe Jason at a young age, where he obviously hasn't had any training so far, we know that Hera's not allowed him to have any of that, that he seems to be just naturally developing these abilities to zone in and cash in on it, so to speak. So interesting to see Jason's future, I think.
For sure.
Especially since we get that little scene where he's like, Hyang's going to show him the Jedi cruiser.
Right.
He's like, you've got a training room? Will you train me? And he's like, no.
Yeah.
Like, oh, do you know how to build a lightsaber? Yes. Will you show me how to build one? No.
Yeah, I love that.
So we're still getting a classic little bit of Star Wars humor in there as well.
Yeah.
So, Hera and the New Republic. So, New Republic are a pain in the fucking ass, man.
Yes.
Like, we've seen it through The Mandalorian, and we see it more in this series. Again, it's just bureaucratic nonsense that's holding them back. And is this just all this? Not obviously exactly the same, but a long line of senators coming from the Republic to the Empire to the New Republic that are all just the same, sniveling, money grabbing, corrupt people for the most part, who only have their self interests at heart and don't really care about the bigger picture. And I think in that episode where we saw Hera talking to Mon Mothma and the rest, Mon Mothma weighs that weight on her shoulders very heavily, because she obviously, as we saw in Andor, battled so hard to start making a change and go against the Empire. And now she sort of seems to be weighed down by the weight of the authority of she's got to listen to all these other idiots around her. And Hera, like you mentioned, is doing what she's right because she knows it's the right thing to do regardless of the consequence. But your thoughts on the state of this ridiculous New Republic?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of also a theme that Andor scratched the surface on, is that it's never, and maybe The Last Jedi before that, there's no good guy here, right? There's no like good guy, bad guy, especially when it comes to the politics. Like that was Andor's, obviously the Empire was bad, but that was a little bit of Andor's thing. And I think like transitioning to Ahsoka from Andor, where we're seeing Mon Mothma have both roles here, I imagine that it, like her fight in Andor, makes it harder for her because she wants to hold on to what they fought for. And that might mean not taking these threats seriously, whether she knows that or not. The weight on her shoulders, like you said, because she doesn't want to let go of finally, like, they won the battle and now she's in charge and she has these other senators around her. Xiono, Hera calls him out. If anyone's watched Resistance, we see a little bit of Xiono, and it focuses on his son. And, we know that maybe he learns to regret some of this stuff. But I think it's also, the arrogance of these political systems. In Mando, we see the New Republic being just as bullheaded and arrogant and not listening, not taking anything seriously. Like you said, it's all just bureaucratic. And I really love seeing that. The politics of Star Wars is something else that really appeals to me, especially in more recent years, and especially with Andor. And seeing these the New Republic leadership, not taking the threat seriously because they can't see it,
Hmm.
but not relying on maybe like the military strategists who who put the rebellion together and led it to the end. Yeah, it's just mind-boggling, but it's also so real. I mean, that's the real frustrating part, right? Depending on where you are in the world, that stuff is just so real. And I think adding it to the show adds a lot to the show. Yeah, especially in juxtaposition to like this magical, mystical Jedi stuff. And we see something else I really appreciated is Carson Teva being kind of the bridge between those two worlds, maybe being our avatar in the series, this episode. But yeah, it's really hard to watch. It's really hard to watch, and it's why I love that moment with Hera so much a few episodes ago, where she was like, "Did you fight in the war, Xiono? You just sat around and waited to see out who came out on top." I'm like, "Yeah, get him, you know." And they're gonna regret it, but it's always the arrogance of people, in those positions in these situations that's really real, but really maddening.
It really does almost make my blood boil in frustration and anger, to the point where I'm always glad they get blown up in Hosnian Prime in episode 7. That's like, not that I wish, the genocide of millions, if not billions, of people, but at the same point, sometimes I'm just like, it's taken them, like, obviously it takes them nearly an extra 25 years or so, but good riddance to the New Republic, and just let normal societies rule themselves without an overhead of a galactic power in charge. Yeah, just so frustrating.
There's no difference, right? That's the main message of what we saw in The Mandalorian on Coruscant. There's no difference between the New Republic and the Empire as far as the politicians on Coruscant.
Yeah,
they're the same senators. They're there. I can't remember what the guy says to Dr. Pershing when he gives his speech at the Senate, but it was very much like, that's what it's like. I can't keep track of who's in charge anymore, because his partner, or one of the women there, is like, "Darling, that was the Empire." And he was like, "I can't keep track," which is, that's the way it is, right? It's from the viewer point of view. Wait, who's in charge here now?
What do we think then about the New Republic saying that, they're ordering Hera to report back to Coruscant, to the Oversight Committee or whatever, and she's potentially going to be stripped of her command within the New Republic fleet? What are we thinking about this? Is sort of, because this was her essential end to the episode in a way, wasn't it? So is she going to get the wrath of the New Republic on her, or do we see that if, well, obviously we anticipate Thrawn will return to this galaxy by the end of this series, and she would have been proved right, and they'll go crawling back on their hands and knees to her? How are you seeing this is going to go for her?
I can't wait to feel vindicated about Hera being right. I mean, I love Mon Mothma, but oh man, I almost hope that Hera gets stripped of her rank, so her and Jason and Chopper can go out and just live somewhere on a farm or something. I don't know. Just do something else. You don't have to be a general your whole life. You've done enough, Hera. Just be with your son, and don't have to bother with these political systems or these senators who aren't taking you seriously, even though you won their war for them. But she will get vindicated, and we're going to see the political system, eat crow when Thrawn does come back. It's so, I mean, it tends to get a little bit tropey as well, but I do think it's very real again. But it's very much like the system cannot believe that this bad guy will return, because that would be admitting that they're weak. And then the bad guy returns, and then they have to rely on someone like Hera to clean up the mess. So, but I do wish she would just ride off into the sunset. I care too much about them.
I was debating with my guest from last week whether Hera gets her happy ending, in terms, because we know that the Ghost is at the Battle of Exegol in episode 9, and the big question is who was on board. Was it Hera, or was it Jason piloting it? Because Hera's either passed away or retired somewhere, putting her feet up, and it's been passed over. Was it Callus and Zeb that have taken control of it? Was Jason killed by Kylo Ren at the New Jedi Academy? That's so lots of questions about whether she gets her riding off into the sunset type ending here. I feel like it should never be that simple. I feel like it's an easy way out. If anyone knows anything about me by now, they know that I don't like it when everyone makes it out unscathed. There has to be some serious deaths along the way, and not everyone can make it out of this with a happy ending. Surely it happens far too often, and to me, that's, I don't know how you feel about this, but to me that's a bad fan service. If you can make everyone go through 2 or 3 galactic wars and all your main characters for the most part come out unscathed, then that's not a proper story, in my opinion. That's not how it would go. I'm not saying we need realism, because we know this is fantasy, but at the same point, not everyone gets a happy ending, regardless of how we should feel about it. So sometimes you need that emotion of a good death in there. Yeah. So, which I'm not saying she's going to die in the series. I don't believe that she will. But I don't believe that she'll get necessarily a happy ending to all this, because she puts her heart and soul too much into the good causes for it to be something she can always walk away from. So
she's in the fight. I mean, she risked everything to start the rebellion, right? It's that's more context from the animated shows, but this is who she is. I'm sure she would never want to leave. Like, she would never say screw you to the Senate when they bring her back to like strip her rank, and she would never just like say fine and run off, because this is literally what she's been fighting for. But I know one of your other recent guests said this as well, but I'm so protective of these characters, especially after the way Rebels ended. So
I agree. I'm super protective over them as well. I don't like them being necessarily messed with so much that they're unrecognizable. Right. And that's always a worry, again, going from animation to live action, is that they're unrecognizable from the characters we've grown to know and love. But at the same point, you're like, I want to cuddle them and make sure they're going to be happy and everything's good for them at the end. But let's move on to the other half of this episode, which I think is more the half people are going to be talking about and discussing and have been waiting for since last week. So we get that cliffhanger last week. Ahsoka wakes up in the world between worlds, and she just hears this, "Hey, Snips, didn't think I'd see you this so soon." Turns around, and there's Anakin Skywalker, and all sorts of theories banding around for the last week. Is this Force Ghost Anakin? Is this just a vision in Ahsoka's mind that she's been having? Is this potentially the son from the Mortis trilogy posing as Anakin? And everyone was questioning, did he have the scar on his face, which we do see he does have. It was just maybe the lights playing tricks on us. Was that his lightsaber, because it looked to be slightly different, even though it did turn out to be his lightsaber in the end as well? All sorts of things coming out of last week's episode. What were your thoughts going into this? What were your theories? What were you hoping to see from this interaction between them?
Oh boy, I did have is he the son moment, because at the end of last episode, like the final things that happens is the caption reads Vader's theme plays or something like that. Like, I watch it with the captions on, and he's once it cut to black, the caption said Vader's music, and some of that music plays. So I was happy seeing him and hearing "Hey, Snips," and then that music played, and I was like, oh, this is bad. I thought that this was good. So I was thinking, like, it might not be exactly what we think here. And so I went my Mortis route. Is it the son? Is he like the father, embodying like balance and stuff like that? Why would they play that music at the end? But honestly, I was just hoping that the world between worlds didn't turn people off. I know that I love the mystical stuff, and I know that it could have gotten a little bit too extra maybe in there, but I think it exceeded my expectations. And we were going into episode 5. This was episode 5. and there was conversations also around like, well, episode 5 of the Book of Boba Fett was when things went maybe downhill, depending on how you like that, how much you like that show. And like episode 5 has become this thing. So I was really happy to see that maybe it broke that curse, in my opinion, depending on, how much you enjoyed the episode 5 or the other things. But yeah, just blown away by how they did the World Between Worlds, especially.
Again, I think it's an interesting point in terms of, because we'd seen this in Rebels, we kind of knew what this place was about and knew what to potentially expect from this place. Whereas if you're someone that hasn't watched Rebels and you don't really have any knowledge about it, or you've not been reading up on the various articles and theories and stuff that's been banded around for the last week about what the World Between Worlds is, I don't think it really plays too much into it. You don't need that much context for what it is because it doesn't really go into explain it. They don't look at the portholes or anything like that in terms of seeing different events from the past, present, and future. You don't hear all the multiple voices like we have before. So really, this could be just like a place in Ahsoka's mind where she's having this vision between her and Anakin. So I thought that was clever at the same point, is you didn't, whichever way you look at it, whether you're someone who doesn't know what this place is or you know exactly what this place is, it plays well into both parties of viewing the episode, which, again, credit to obviously Dave Filoni and the writers that did this episode, that they managed to do that. Now, the obviously interaction between themselves. So many great things about this interaction.
Yeah.
Anakin's like, still got some things to teach you, and she's just like, I thought my training's over with. He's like, never too old to learn a few things.
Yeah. I love that.
Always, especially since this is, I don't know if I mentioned it in last week's episode, the From a Certain Point of View books. I don't know if you've read any of these. They recently, obviously, a collection of short stories about either side characters or background characters or some of the main characters from the different original trilogy shows. And the most recent one that came out just about a week or so ago was The Return of the Jedi From a Certain Point of View. And there's a short story in there by Michael Shin, who wrote the recent novel called Brotherhood, which is a story about Anakin and Obi-Wan just after the start of Clone Wars. He writes this short story, and it's about Anakin passing, at the end of episode 6 when he dies, about him passing into the Force and how he reacts to all that and having a chat with Kenobi and stuff. And so, me having read that, I don't know if they did this deliberately with the timing of all the release that we got last week's episode. They released the book, and then we get to see a Force Ghost Anakin. And so, the change of Anakin from where he was to when he's become a Force Ghost, and he gets to release all that burden he has on him and accept who he is and take on his shoulders the things he's done, both good or bad. And then you see him in here chatting to Ahsoka, and he's like, never too old to learn. There's always something you're going to be able to learn, no matter what I've taught you. That hit heavy for me.
I love that.
And the interaction they have was like, the lesson is, do you live or do you die? And then they go on this journey through, essentially, their journey through the Clone Wars together, where we start off at the beginning with what turns out to be obviously a very young Ahsoka at the beginning of the Clone Wars, and she's like, this is one of our first missions together. And again, they're on a sandy planet, which I'm sure Anakin was absolutely obviously thrilled about, to be back on a sandy planet.
I don't like sand.
So he was, but what's great is the actress playing young Ahsoka, because, well, first of all, when they had their lightsaber battle, which was epic.
Oh, so good. Yeah. So good.
And Ahsoka being able to sort of clock him on the face, and she's like, don't think you've got that much left to teach me. And he's like, there's always something left to learn. And then obviously cuts the looking ground away from her, and she plummets through these clouds. And then we see, this great transition from what turns out to be almost like a sandstorm. And then phase 1 clone troopers coming out of there, and Ahsoka's lying face down on the ground. And I spotted right away, that's not the same Ahsoka. That's a young Ahsoka.
100%.
And she stands up. And to be fair, the actress that plays her, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. I haven't got it written down in front of me. But this is the same actress that played young Gamora in Infinity War.
Yes.
So anyone that maybe recognised her a little bit, that's possibly where we know her from in most recent times. But then obviously we're at this whole thing of, them interacting at the start of the Clone Wars, and Ahsoka feeling maybe the weight of the fact that the clones around her are all dying. And we get we get Captain Rex, but we don't get Captain Rex.
Twice.
The shot of him being in the background, and then the very, sort of brief clip of him talking to her.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to have them to have that chat about, the clip I played at the start of the show of, everything, depends on experience and stuff. Yeah. And that is a mentioned little thing for us Clone Wars and Rebels fans, but we didn't quite get that. But your reactions to seeing our first real live action Rex as well in there, and that first bit of the transition from the War Between Worlds to the Clone Wars sort of start.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think, like, so many people were talking about how weird Anakin looked at the end of last week's episode, and then we get into this one and he looks phenomenal, especially when they go like into her memories or whatever of them being at the beginning of the Clone Wars. It just looked so good. Not just him, but the armor and everything. So good. And then that transition when he breaks the floor out from underneath her, I talked about last week, the transition from the ruins to the ocean to the world between worlds at the end of last episode was just mind-blowingly good. And this was so smart. And it triggered in me like, oh, is this a little bit of Mortis? Because it to me was very reminiscent of when Anakin is battling with his potential future as Vader in Mortis. We see that same kind of like red smoke. So and then I think they're on Ryloth in the first little
looks like it,
thing. And so just seeing young Ahsoka, this is what I'm talking about. Like, I don't necessarily know if we saw that exact moment in the Clone Wars or in the Clone Wars movie.
Not that I recall.
But having that context for the people who didn't watch the animated stuff of their relationship and of how they started out together, I think is incredible and so smart to do it that way. I think just like everyone needing to know a little bit more of their backstory together is such an amazing way to do it. And then seeing Ahsoka being both like old and young Ahsoka in that little girl of saying, this is the Clone Wars. Yeah, I thought we were training. And he's like, this is your training. And they go running into battle. And we see her OG green lightsaber, which was awesome as well. And seeing her regret and remorse about having to be a soldier. I think like this is something that the Clone Wars started asking, right? Again, like what does it mean to be a soldier? What does it mean to be a Jedi? Like Kanan saying in Rebels, there were 10,000 Jedi Knights protecting the galaxy. And then, but Ahsoka in this saying, this war is not what I signed up for. I think it's just incredible to see. And Ahsoka has become so much about a journey, I think. She's my favorite. I should have said this at the start. She's my favorite character. I don't know if you can see all my Ahsoka stuff behind me. But Ahsoka's my favorite character. She's very important to me. And what I've loved about her is her journey. She thinks she knows. She thinks the world is a certain way, and then we see her learn to accept things more nuanced or in a more gray tone, and then that's when the character grows, and we got to see that in the Clone Wars. Think about the episode just when she's off with Padme, and she thinks the Separatists are evil, and then she like meets them and grows in that moment, and then she carries that along with her. And I think that it was so smart to do the next stage of her training, quote unquote, of her education, of her growth this way, by showing her the past, by showing her who Anakin was, and what Anakin became was not necessarily entirely who he was. And that being the lesson that he's trying to get through to her because she feels remorse about abandoning him. We know that from like episode 1. It was such a smart way to do it. And then to see him transition between those two versions of himself was also just very incredible to see, but incredible also to feel, right? Especially from her perspective. So
because we get that second half then when they transition from the start of the Clone Wars into the end of the Clone Wars and the Siege of Mandalore. So I can't do it straight away. As soon as you see, obviously, the the Darth Maul Mandalorians.
I was really hoping we'd get Maul. Just a little. I know it would have broken the internet or turned people off, but Sam Witwer voiced Marek a little bit, and I was like, oh, maybe we'll just see a little bit of her conversation with Maul about Anakin. Sadly, no, but I was really hoping for it.
But yeah, smart as well with Anakin being like, I didn't remember this battle.
And
she's like, you weren't here. Obviously, by this stage, we'd already parted ways. And,
right.
And, the trauma that she went through at the end of the Clone Wars, as we know very well, the burn that she felt with Rex and trying not to harm everyone on the Venator after Order 66. She's like, at the end of the day, they can't help it. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
And she's like, I won't kill any of them, even though they will obviously die in the end, because as Rex points out, they don't care. They have no control over it at this moment in time. They will kill themselves to kill her or die trying either way. And, so it's going to the very end of the Clone Wars. She's again feeling this heavy burden, I think, through her memories and the weight of it. And she's questioning, who am I? Was I, because it seems always a bit weird to me throughout the series. She's questioned about, who am I in terms of, am I just this person that has death and destruction that follows me around everywhere? And I'm like, that's always been, to me, a bit of a weird way of her thinking about it. I never thought of her as being someone that did. Vader, sure. Death and destruction follows Vader because he's normally the one leading it. But at the same point, I never thought of Ahsoka as someone who would think that she is like an embodiment of death and destruction, because everywhere she goes, it happens because of who she is and her connection to want to do good all around her leads her into fights, into battles, and into wars. It's taken me a little while of thinking as well, and it's almost even still dawning me a little bit during our conversation in terms of what Anakin was trying to teach her through this. We'll get on to the last part of their interaction and battle in a moment, but in terms of, I'm sat there going, what is the lesson that he's trying to teach her here? Because he just keeps saying, the lesson here is whether you live or die. But there's a bit in there where he says to her, I think he's trying to teach her, he's like, when she was questioning, is this all that, I didn't, this wasn't something I expected to be. I didn't want to be a soldier. This is not what I signed up for. And he's like, you need to adapt to the times around you. And this is what Jedi do. Right now we need to be leaders in the Clone Wars. And he's like, but you need to adapt to the situation around you and to what's happening in the times around you. And to me, that was the lesson then that he was trying to impart is, yes, you've had to go through a lot. You've been trained to survive because I trained you to do that. You survived the Clone Wars. I essentially taught you, as we get to see in Tales of the Jedi, to survive an attack by clones, which he does, a couple of times, including Order 66. And he's like, I've taught you to adapt and to survive in any situation. This is what you need to do now, because there is going to be a fight and there is going to be a war with Thrawn. And you need to have the understanding and capability that you know how to win this and you know how to get through it and that you know how to live and not die. And to me, that was, at the end of the day, what I've understood is the lesson that he was trying to impart here. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think I felt the same way a little bit after the first watch. I watched it twice. I think there were a lot of lessons Anakin was trying to get through to her. I think there was you do have to adapt. I think he's trying to get her to see things not so black and white. She's been very black and white this entire series. Like, if the enemy has the map, they'll get to Thrawn, so we can't let that happen. We need to destroy the map, even if it means we can't find Ezra. There's been stuff like that this whole time, and she's been very sad and lonely and remorseful and stuff like that throughout the series. And I think he's trying to show her that, for better or worse, the Jedi at that time were soldiers and she was trained as a soldier. But that doesn't mean she has to continue to be a soldier. Yes, there's a fight coming with Thrawn, but I think he's trying to show her that there's a freedom in not having to be just one thing, right? Like, you don't have to continue to be a soldier. You're going to have to continue to fight because there's a fight coming, but you don't have to be this one thing. I think that's one thing he was trying to get across. I also think that there's a few moments of him trying to relieve her regret about what he became, because they have that interaction when they're on Mandalore of her saying, "You're more powerful and dangerous than any of us ever realized," and he said, "Is that what this is about?" And indicates that she has learned nothing from this lesson and that they're going to start again, and then they start fighting again. I think that there's a lot there. I think the main thing is that when it comes to a conclusion, when they're back in the world between worlds and she's fighting Anakin / Vader, some of those transitions were incredible as well. When the bombs are dropping and we see Vader and he's just this literal force of nature coming at her. Fighting her, lightsaber dueling with both hands also, which we very rarely see Vader do. There's this moment of maybe we were going to get to this. I'm sorry if I'm stealing your thunder, but that final clash of them in the world between worlds, I think, has a very specific lesson. So I don't know if we want to get to that in addition. Okay. So they have this clash. He's got his red lightsaber and his eyes are red, right? And I think I posted the question in a Discord group I'm in, and I was like, was this the best live action lightsaber duel we've seen? I believe that it is. Like, Anakin v Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith is one thing, but this was something completely different. So they have the clash. She gets his saber, and we see her eyes turn red a bit as she's contemplating that decision, right? And then she throws his lightsaber away, like Luke did. And then we see him, she says, "I choose to live," and we see Anakin back up and like calm himself. Like that he has found peace. And maybe they go into this in this short story that you were talking about. Like, he is able to be both things. He is able to find peace and balance in both things. He fights when he has to fight, but he's also Anakin when he can be Anakin. He takes a step back, he closes his eyes, he breathes. When he opens his eyes again, they're not red anymore. Like, he has figured it out. He's figured out how to control the Hulk, right? And I think that that's what he was trying to teach her. Like, you can be more than one thing. You don't have to be lonely. You don't have to regret. You don't have to be just a soldier. You can take it when you need to. You can take a step back, take a breath, and exist in peace and in balance. And I think that's the main lesson there. And that's why we see her come out of it the way she does.
I mean, it was great in terms when you were saying that, when she was holding his red lightsaber and, it glows on our face red, very reminiscent of obviously the Kenobi series when Kenobi and Vader have their final talk, and the reflection of the lightsaber in both of them sort of dictates how they actually feel in that conversation. Very clever, again, I think, here. But I just have to get it out the way because it's something that I had immense joy at, was seeing Anakin / this iteration of Anakin as Vader with a red lightsaber. Yeah. Basically a pre-suit Vader with a red lightsaber. It's something I've wanted for so long. I know that George Lucas toyed with the idea of obviously having Anakin with a red lightsaber in Revenge of the Sith, and he didn't do it because they were on Mustafar, and he said it would have clashed with the background, so he decided to keep it blue. Semantics, don't need that. I need Anakin with a red lightsaber.
Yeah. I don't need excuses, I need results.
So it was just that little moment, because obviously everyone knows I'm a huge Anakin and Vader fan. So to finally see this iteration of Anakin and Vader with a red lightsaber was a little dream come true for me, just as a little side note to that. But yeah, again, the transitions in this, like you said, when you're seeing, he's walking through smoke and he's going through, Anakin flash Vader. Even obviously at the very start of those scenes at the Clone Wars, when you see it, going through to when he stomped through back into the world between worlds, and as he said, it's just that would scare the shit out of me. So I don't know about you, but even if I knew I could probably handle battling Vader or Anakin, or I had the capability and ability to do so, still watching him walk together and that happening in front of my eyes, I would be a little bit petrified. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, what an interaction between these two! What an episode! In terms of, you know, we can speculate week after week about what we would thought we might see, but I don't think any of us expected this.
No.
In terms of these Clone Wars flashbacks, get to see young Ahsoka and Anakin imparting that knowledge to her of what she needs to know to be able to get through this and move on and move forward. And just obviously the whole, the lessons never end. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter how wise you think you are. You always got time for a bit of schooling.
Yeah.
And I guess we're truly believing that this was, because I did postulate the question. It was just a quick, as soon as the episode finished, I was like, was this a genuine Force ghost Anakin that had pulled Ahsoka into the world between worlds through the Force, or was this more a vision she just had in her own mind of digging out the knowledge that she already had, but just needed to be reminded of? I don't want it to be anything other than a Force ghost Anakin appearance, but as we have to sometimes put the question out there, do you think this was just because at the end of the day, was this just a pure vision that Ahsoka had in her head because she had the knowledge, she just needed a way to save herself from drowning or whatever? Or was this a genuine Forced Anakin imparting one last lesson to his Padawan?
Yeah, interesting. I think there's some philosophical questions here. Like, if it is happening in her mind, does that mean it's not happening for real? But there's a couple of things. I mean, we know that you and I specifically know that the world between worlds exists, and it is this like realm that Force users can reach in certain places. There's access to it, and Jason hears it going on. Jason and Hera seemingly hear it going on, which is, for me, I was also questioning it. Like, is this all in her mind? But when Jason heard it, that's when it kind of switched. Like, there is something going on here, I think. And I do really love that. I really love the idea of Force Ghost Anakin, of him still having a presence in these people's lives, like not just passing on, but maybe becoming what he was always meant to become, and continuing to teach as not what he did, like as what he did was wrong. I really, really love this, and I want to believe that he will continue to be that presence for her and Luke and whoever else.
Will we see any more Anakin in this series, do you think?
I think probably not. Maybe if there's season or series 2 at some point or something. I don't think we'll see him again before the end of this season. What about what do you think?
Yeah, I was debating it in my head. It's like, could he appear for one last thought, or that whole thing in maybe the finale episode where she's having some kind of showdown with Thrawn and Morgan Elsbeth, and she gets knocked unconscious at some point, or she's being tortured perhaps, and Anakin comes to one final time and goes, "What was I just saying to you a few episodes ago? Sort yourself out and get yourself back out there," sort of thing. And, obviously, the more Anakin I get, the better. I'm never going to say no to more appearances. Realistically, will he appear? Maybe not. Obviously, or more likely not, I should say. I think they would probably leave it as that. It's they don't want to tease too much of these things and want to deal with the story in front of them rather than that. They just dedicated an episode and a bit to all the speculation and hype around it. I don't think they'll go any further than that. But yeah, I would love one last little cameo in the finale, maybe, like I said, just to give her one last kick up the backside if she needs it, and just be like, go out there, sort yourself out, and go and do what you need to do. You're a Jedi after all, sort of thing. Whether she feels she's a Jedi or not because she walked away, I don't think it matters at this point, because he's just like, he probably feels that she is a Jedi. And she's constantly getting called a Jedi in the Mandoverse. I mean, and she never really seems to correct anyone.
Yeah, exactly. She only corrected Vader that one time. I would love to see it as once this threat is done or something like that, I would love to see her meditating and communing with him or communicating with him, like continuing her training as Force Ghost Jedi tend to do with their Padawans or whatever.
Well, I'm going to put the question to you actually as we draw this chat to a close, because it's something I've been chatting obviously to a few people about since it's going to be coming this way in terms of the Mandoverse film that Dave Filoni is going to be directing. That brings to a close the Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett, the Ahsoka, and when we eventually get it, the Skeleton Crew storylines. That I've been putting it forward that I see Ahsoka maybe dying in this film. That could be the end of her story. Simply because I know that in the episode 9, when Rey's on her back in Exegol, she's one of the voices that she hears when she's talking to the former Jedi that have passed. So I think by that point, Ahsoka's passed on, and I see this film being the perfect way to wrap up her story, because she can make a sacrifice for the greater good in that very martyr type way that I don't necessarily always like, but right. For Ahsoka it would seem somewhat perfect. A way to maybe to stop Thrawn once and for all, because I said I could see obviously Thrawn dying in this film because he's not around in the future, Ahsoka dying in this film, possibly even Boba Fett he's getting a bit old, story coming to an end. A good way to wrap up everyone's story, but Ahsoka specifically, I'm going to be my predictions are terrible, by the way. They never seem to be on the nose, so I'm probably completely wrong about this. But how would you feel about that, Ahsoka dying in Dave Filoni's Mandoverse film?
I don't want it to happen, but I would understand that it would be good closure. And what I think we're getting from this Ahsoka the White that she came out of the World Between Worlds as is someone at peace. So maybe being at peace with that, like she's more at peace with everything than we've seen her in a long time, it feels like. So the understanding, much like Kanan, that she's going into this battle and that this will be the battle. And I would love for her to go into things that way, for there to be that level of understanding and willingness to, fight for the greater good, the quote unquote greater good. But I also don't want it to happen because I love her and I need her. I need Ahsoka and I need Ashley Eckstein to just continue to be in the top of our minds for as long as possible.
So at the end of this episode, then, you did mention it, is exactly how we've been calling it in our house. Ahsoka the White pops out after the World Between Worlds. Change of, obviously outfit, looking very very Gandalf-like. And obviously we get this great scene where she connects like Ezra did to the Purgle. And quite frankly, I wasn't expecting them to just sit in the mouth of this Purgle as it flips off into hyperspace. I was expecting them to do more like they did Rebels, where they connect to it with the tentacles and pull it along with them. So the episode ends that way. How are you feeling about this end? And obviously it looks like they're heading to this new galaxy.
Yeah, I love seeing the Purgle. It's something I've geeked out on air before. I think they look amazing. I think it's really cool. I did question, okay, well, we're riding in the Purgle's mouth, but the more I think about it, the more that's the most practical way to create this effect, right? Like wrapping their tentacles around the ship. It might have looked too weird in live action to do it that way. So I came to terms with them being in its mouth or whatever. But I do love that. I love everything about it. Like I said, I loved every moment of this episode. But just Ahsoka coming out of the World Between Worlds that way, of being very calm, cool, collected, smile, just at peace and relying on the Force, right? Where she has cut herself off from the Force in the past, or at least has not accessed it as well. And we're seeing Hugh Yang say, "Are you sure they can lead us to Sabine?" And she's like, "I have no idea." He's like, "What?" She's like, "No idea. We're just gonna go, and it's better than not going," right? And that's so good. I could have watched an entire season of them just flying around to different places with the Purgle and doing different things. That is so good. I hope we don't get a lot of it. I don't think they'll go directly there. I think there will be some weird stop along the way or something. I do think that something will come up, but I really loved seeing that, and I loved the whole kind of, we'll call it a vibe. I love the whole vibe of Ahsoka at the end. And then her promise to Hera, it was all so good and a very emotional moment. And of course, may the force be with you. Just, I guess that's the first thing I thought when the episode ended. I was like, this could have been the end of the season, and I would have been happy because it was, the music is triumphant and may the force be with you and all that stuff.
It was the last thing I was going to mention about this, because you mentioned it before we jumped onto the recording, and it got me at different points throughout this, because something I've criticised some of the newer Star Wars shows for is not implementing Star Wars music, so to speak, or Star Wars scores. Especially in the Kenobi series, they had an opportunity to really dig back into some of the prequel music and some of the, like, Jewel of the Heroes music and stuff like that they didn't utilise. But here, when you've got Jason and Hera standing on the cliff top listening to the waves, and you get the Star Wars theme music kicking in, and the different scores that we did get through this. And there was even a hint of some of the episode 3 music in the clashes between Ahsoka and Anakin as well. The score on this was fantastic. Probably one of the best scored episodes of any Star Wars show.
Yeah, and when they're on, I think it's when they're in the flashback in the Siege of Mandalore, we hear Kyner's season 7 Clone Wars music. And that is my favorite. Season 7 of the Clone Wars soundtrack is probably my favorite Star Wars music. John Williams is great, but Kevin Kiner, in my opinion, takes things to a whole new level, and specifically with season 7 of the Clone Wars. So it was awesome hearing that a little bit in this episode.
Yeah, very overall. Yeah, don't think we can deny one of the best Star Wars episodes that we've had for anything. So, Jerry, thank you so much for coming on this week and discussing one of the biggest Star Wars episodes ever with me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Tell everyone at home exactly where we can find you, where we can find your podcast online.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be asked to come on. I'm specifically honored to be asked to come on to talk about this episode. Like, what a big deal this episode was. So thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot. You can find my podcast anywhere you find podcasts. Krypton to Alderaan. We do a lot more on YouTube these days, so if you're willing to catch us on YouTube, go over there and hit subscribe, and you can find us on any social media, same handle, Krypton to Alderaan. And thanks so much again for having me.
Absolute pleasure, buddy. Absolute pleasure. You're doing really well on YouTube as well. I know that you are doing really good over that side of it. So congratulations on the success over there and the amount of subscribers you've got over there. I'm still working on getting all my episodes on YouTube and hopefully can start burning up a little bit on there. But it's been fantastic to have you on. I really do appreciate it. Of course, all the links will be in the episode description. So give Joey and give his podcast a follow and a listen if you haven't so far. It really is worth it. As I mentioned, they've got a great jingle at the start of their episode as well. It's been one of my favourites alongside Lights Camera Rant, who have got a great video intro to theirs. But I love listening to your little jingle at the start. It's a great one. But thank you so much for coming on. I, of course, will be back next week for episode 6 of Ahsoka. Only a few more weeks to go. And we've also got, the end of series is going to be bumper because we've got the end of Ahsoka and the start of Loki all in the same week. So when that comes in a few weeks' time, that's going to be a bumper episode to do. But until then, I'll be back next week. Everyone take care of yourself. And always remember,
the Force will be with you always.